And the big question over today is, how do you live out your values when the world around you is not reflecting your values and you feel that squeeze? How do you be passionate about your faith when your natural trajectory is into apathy and to disregard the things that you value the most? And that's the question for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're trying to measure, okay, how do I live my faith out here in this society and follow and honor the code of Yahweh and our God? And so there's this moment where in Babylon, what would happen when you were in the markets buying apples or whatever it is, music would play, and you were supposed to hit your knee and worship the Babylonian gods. And this was a huge test of faith for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we'll draw out some application for this in just a moment. It says, the herald loudly proclaimed, verse 4. And that's not a guy named Harold or Harry. That's somebody would come to the edge of town and say, hey, time to take a knee. And they would play music with this. Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. So you get a picture here. It's a pluralistic society. It's a society in Babylon, not that different than ours. You have people from every tribe, nation, tongue, ethnicity, religious background trying to coexist in the same space. And here they are in the market, and in Babylon, what they would do is they would play this music, and it didn't matter what your background was, you were supposed to hit a knee. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the herald would proclaim, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, the steel guitar, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the emperor, has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. It's a parenting strategy. You can try that one too. Do what I say, or you'll be thrown into a blazing furnace. So this was what they said to do. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we'll pick up their story in just a moment. We're going to look at them for the next couple of weeks. They are in this moment going, okay, we have our values of our God that we grew up with, and so their whole life they would go to temple, they would go to synagogue, they would pray their prayers, they would cite their scriptures, they would have the Torah, the first 5 books memorized. All this had been washed over them their whole life. But here they are, they've been snatched up, plopped into Babylon. Harp, lyre, music, xylophone, whatever you want to call it, plays. Everybody around them hits a knee, bowing to the Babylonian gods. And you got to like these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because in this moment they're going, not us. How Nebuchadnezzar would keep the peace is he would essentially privatize religion. And he would say, look, wherever you're from, whatever your background is, that's fine. Worship your gods, speak your language, do your thing in private. But when you're in public and you hear the music play, you better hit a knee. And that was how you kept the peace in Babylon. And essentially what he's saying to these 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is he's saying, look, I'm not telling you to worship Babylon instead of your God, Yahweh. I'm telling you to worship Babylon in addition to your God. And he's essentially, the strategy to keep the peace in a society where everybody has a different thought process and everybody thinks we have absolute truth and our God's the God and this is the way and this is how you're supposed to do it. The way he keeps the peace is he says, fine, you do that in private, but when you're in public and you hear the music play, you better look like everybody else. And you feel that squeeze constantly. Look, raise your kids with values and ethics. Teach them the 10 Commandments. That's all fine and good. Even teach them some of the Sermon on the Mount. That's probably beneficial somewhere along the way. But when you are by the pool with the other moms and dads, you better raise your kids like everybody else. Your kids better look like everybody else. And part of the question is, how do you differentiate yourself in a society that's constantly squeezing you, saying this is what you are supposed to look like and this is what you're supposed to do? But Jeremiah 29 says this. God has said, I'm saying this, if you read the full context, to the exiles, those of you that are being dragged off from Jerusalem to Babylon. He says, you're going to be there for 70 years. Get comfortable. It's going to be a little while. And you're going to be living in a culture and a society where everywhere you look around you, Religion is a private thing. It's a passive thing. It's not something in public you are to talk about. It's not something you're supposed to demonstrate. And if anybody catches a whiff of it, they're going to play the music and tell you to hit a knee. And how do you live your faith out there is what God's concerned with in the book of Jeremiah. When you get there, you got some options. One option is you sit by the river of Babylon and you just cry about it and go, I just want things to be the way they used to be. That's one option. Another option is you can scream at everybody and get yourself thrown in the blazing furnace. Well, that's not a great option either. Another option is what God tells them to do. He says, when you get there, he says, I want you to build houses and settle down, which is not what they were expecting. It's like, whoa, plant gardens and eat what they produce. And then he says this, I want you to marry and have sons and daughters, raise kids there, go to school there. Start businesses there. Flourish there. Seek flourishing for yourselves. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. And you got men about to be dragged off to Babylon, and they're like, I don't want to go to Babylon. And he's like, no, you're going to go be a grandpa in Babylon. I know you're only 15 now, but you're going to be a grandpa one day. And God blesses you, and he's saying, I'm with you in that. So that they too may have sons and daughters, increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, and I love this, he says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Seek the peace and the prosperity of a place that does not look the way you want it to look. And he says this, pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. That's probably not the message they wanted to hear. God, we want you to defeat Babylon and make it look the way we want it to look. He says, no, I want you to get there, and when you encounter somebody who does not have your values, passionately live out your faith by praying for them and seeking their prosperity, because if they prosper, Babylon prospers, you too are going to prosper. And he says, you go there, and he says, I want you to live this way. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to them. Seek the peace and the prosperity of the city around you. I want you to go, and I want you to be for Babylon. And as a church, as followers of Christ, how you take that and live that out in a society, in a world that, as you look around, you go, whoa. The music I hear on the radio, the words my coworkers say, the things that my single friends do on the weekends, the way that dating works if you're single, nothing in my culture seems to reflect the values that I was raised with, that I hold dear to, that I pray to, the God that I pray to. It seems like everywhere I look, Babylon, Babylon, Babylon. And we live this out by saying, you know what? I want to seek the good of those whose values are different than mine. And instead of screaming at them about their bad values, I want to pray for them. I want to seek the peace and the prosperity of them. Instead of, folding my arms and being surprised when non-Christians act like non-Christians. Has that ever been shocking to you? I can't believe she said those words. It's like, well, she doesn't have Ephesians in her heart as say no unwholesome words that aren't edifying. Of course, people in our culture don't act like they follow Jesus because they don't follow Jesus. And instead of fighting that, say, I'm going to seek the peace and the prosperity of those who are around me, and I'm going to be for people in my city whose businesses don't reflect my values. I'm going to be for people in my city who live out values that are different than my values. I'm going to be for school systems that don't always advocate for the things I care about. I'm going to pray for my leaders. I'm going to pray for the people around me, whether they go to the same church or have the same beliefs or not, because if they prosper, I will prosper. And as a church, it's why we have good neighbor everywhere. It's why we talk about serving our city, seeking the good of our city, not because our city reflects our values constantly, but because we believe if it prospers, we too will prosper. And we anchor ourselves in Babylon and say, but we still are going to be passionate about our faith here.